London, 1845. The society papers would speak of nothing else for weeks. Miss Georgiana Oakley had been ruined, utterly and completely. The scandal had spread through London drawing-rooms faster than influenza in winter, whispered behind fans and murmured over teacups with equal measures of feigned sympathy and undisguised delight. Poor dear Georgiana, they would say, to be jilted at the altar by Lord Huntington. And for her own cousin. How she must suffer. Georgiana did not, in fact, suffer from a broken heart. Lord Huntington had been her father's choice, not hers, a means to salvage the family's dwindling fortune through an advantageous match. What she suffered from was the public humiliation, the pitying glances, and the knowledge that her future prospects had vanished like morning mist. At 23, she was damaged goods in the marriage market, a cautionary tale rather than a desirable match. "We are ruined," her father lamented, pacing their modest London townhouse with unsteady steps. Sir William Oakley had once been respected in society, but years of gambling debts and poor investments had whittled away their security. Completely ruined. No gentleman of means will have you now. Georgiana sat stiffly in the drawing-room, her back painfully straight, hands folded in her lap as she had been taught by countless governesses. "Perhaps that is for the best, father. I have no wish to be had by any gentleman, of means or otherwise." "Don't be impertinent," her father snapped. "You understand nothing of our situation. The creditors are circling like vultures. Without a wealthy marriage, we face debtor's prison." A letter arrived the following morning. Georgiana recognized the heavy parchment and imposing seal immediately, correspondence from Baron Zachariah, the cold and calculating peer whose reputation for ruthlessness in business was matched only by his apparent disinterest in society. Known simply as Baron Z in most circles, he rarely attended social functions and, when he did, spoke little and smiled less. Her father read the missive with trembling hands, his expression transforming from despair to something Georgiana found even more disturbing, hope. "It seems, daughter, that Providence has not abandoned us entirely," he said, an unsettling gleam in his eye. "Baron Zachariah wishes to call upon us this afternoon. He has a proposition to discuss." "What business could the Baron possibly have with us?" Georgiana asked. Their families had no connections, and the Baron moved in far more elevated circles than the nearly destitute Oakleys could now claim. "That is not your concern," her father replied, already pulling the bell cord to summon the housekeeper. "Wear your blue dress, the one with the lace collar. And for heaven's sake, attempt to look pleasant." Baron Quinlan Zachariah arrived precisely at 3 o'clock, his imposing figure filling the modest drawing-room with an air of cold authority. He was taller than Georgiana remembered from their brief encounters at various society functions, his shoulders broad beneath his impeccably tailored coat. His features were sharp, all angles and planes, with penetrating grey eyes that seemed to see through pretense and artifice. At 35, he was not handsome in the conventional sense. There was something too severe, too unyielding in his countenance for conventional attractiveness. Yet Georgiana could not deny a certain compelling quality to his presence. "Miss Oakley," he said with a formal bow, his voice deep and measured. "Thank you for receiving me." "The pleasure is ours, my lord," her father interjected before Georgiana could respond. "May I offer you some refreshment? Tea, perhaps? Or something stronger?" "Tea will suffice," the Baron replied, his gaze never leaving Georgiana's face. An uncomfortable silence descended as the maid brought the tea service. Georgiana felt like a specimen under a microscope as the Baron observed her with cool detachment. "I shall be direct, Miss Oakley," he finally said after taking a measured sip of tea. "I find myself in need of a wife, and you find yourself in need of a husband. I believe we might come to an arrangement beneficial to both parties." Georgiana nearly choked on her tea. "I beg your pardon." "My lord," her father interceded, shooting her a warning glance, "we are honored by your interest in my daughter. "I am not speaking to you, Sir William," the Baron said coldly. "This decision must be Miss Oakley's, as it affects her life most directly." Georgiana set down her teacup with deliberate care, struggling to maintain her composure. "You propose a business arrangement, then? A marriage of convenience?" "Precisely," Baron Zachariah nodded approvingly. "I require a hostess for my homes and a mother for potential heirs. You require financial security and restoration of your social standing. The terms are simple: I will settle all your father's debts and provide you with a generous allowance. In return, you will fulfill the duties of Baroness Zachariah without complaint." "And what of love, my lord?" Georgiana asked, ignoring her father's horrified expression. "Does that factor into your calculations at all?" A flicker of something, amusement, perhaps, crossed the Baron's face before his expression returned to its usual impassivity. "Love is a luxury, Miss Oakley, and one that neither of us can presently afford. I offer respect and security in its stead. Many would consider that a fair exchange." "Many would, indeed," she agreed, meeting his gaze steadily. "But I am not many, my lord." "Georgiana," her father hissed. The Baron raised a hand to silence Sir William. "Allow Miss Oakley to speak freely. I have no use for a wife who cannot voice her thoughts." "Then you shall have to forgive my bluntness, Baron," Georgiana continued. "While I appreciate the practicality of your offer, I find myself curious about your sudden need for a bride. Surely a man of your standing could have his pick of suitable young ladies, unsullied by scandal and more accomplished than I." For the first time, the Baron appeared slightly discomforted. "My grandmother's will stipulates that I must marry before her anniversary in August if I am to retain control of certain family properties. As for my choice of bride—" His eye swept over her with cool assessment. "You are intelligent, well-bred despite your father's failings, and the recent scandal has made you available on short notice. I value efficiency, Miss Oakley." Georgiana felt a bubble of hysterical laughter rise in her throat. "How flattering to be deemed efficient, my lord." "I did not come here to flatter you," he replied. "I came to offer a solution to our mutual problems. You have until tomorrow morning to consider. I shall call at 11 for your answer." He rose to his feet with fluid grace. "Good day, Miss Oakley." "Sir William." After he departed, her father turned to her with fury in his eyes. "If you refuse this offer, Georgiana, I shall never forgive you. Never. Do you understand what is at stake?" Georgiana understood perfectly. She spent a sleepless night weighing her limited options. By morning, her decision was made. "I accept your proposal," she told the Baron when he returned, her voice steady despite her inner turmoil. "But I have conditions of my own." His eyebrows rose fractionally. "Indeed? And what might those be?" "My father's debts will be settled completely, and he will receive an annual allowance sufficient to live modestly but comfortably. Second, I retain full authority over household matters and staff at all your residencies. Third," she paused, gathering her courage, "while I understand this is a business arrangement, I expect to be treated with respect, in public and in private." The Baron studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Your terms are acceptable," he finally said. "We shall be married by special license next week. My solicitor will draw up the necessary papers." And so it was decided. In a small ceremony attended only by necessary witnesses, Georgiana Oakley became Baroness Zachariah, entering a marriage as cold and transactional as her husband's reputation. Thornfield Hall, the Baron's ancestral home in Derbyshire, was as imposing as its master, a grand stone edifice that seemed to glower down at visitors from its perch on a windswept hill. Georgiana arrived there 3 days after their wedding, following a brief and painfully awkward honeymoon at the Baron's London house. Their marriage remained unconsummated, a fact that brought Georgiana equal measures of relief and indignation. The Baron had been scrupulously polite but distant, treating her more as a business partner than a wife. "Your chambers are in the east wing," he informed her upon their arrival. "Mine are in the west. We need not disturb each other except when social obligations require our joint presence." "As you wish, my lord," Georgiana replied with brittle politeness. "Though I wonder what the servants will think of such an arrangement." "The servants are paid to serve, not to think," he said dismissively. "Mrs. Winters, the housekeeper, will show you everything you need to know. I have business matters to attend to for the next several days." And with that, he left her to settle into her new role as mistress of Thornfield Hall, a role that proved more challenging than anticipated. The house had been without a lady's touch for many years, and the staff regarded her with thinly veiled suspicion. Mrs. Winters, a formidable woman who had served the Zachariah family for decades, seemed particularly resistant to Georgiana's authority. "The master prefers his breakfast at precisely 8 o'clock, the housekeeper informed her frostily during their initial tour of the house. "The previous baroness always ensured, I am the current baroness, Mrs. Winters," Georgiana interrupted gently but firmly. "And while I respect the traditions of this household, there may be changes as I settle into my role. I would value your guidance, but I will make the final decisions." The older woman's lips pursed in disapproval, but she nodded stiffly. "As you wish, my lady." The first week passed in a blur of inventory-taking and introductions. Georgiana saw little of her husband, who seemed to deliberately schedule his days to avoid her. Their only interactions occurred at dinner, where conversation was limited to polite inquiries about each other's health and brief discussions of household matters. On the 8th day, a visitor arrived, Lady Victoria Zachariah, the Baron's younger sister, who burst into the morning room like a summer storm. "So you're Quinlan's bride," she exclaimed, studying Georgiana with frank curiosity. "How perfectly odd. I never thought he'd actually go through with it." "Lady Victoria," Georgiana acknowledged, rising to greet her sister-in-law. "I'm pleased to meet you." "Oh, call me Victoria, please. We're family now, after all, even if it is by the most peculiar arrangement." She dropped into a chair, removing her gloves with quick, decisive movements. "I came as soon as I heard. Couldn't quite believe the news. Quinlan married to a woman he barely knows, and one with a scandal attached. It's so unlike him." "Your brother is a practical man," Georgiana replied carefully. "Our marriage serves a purpose for both of us." Victoria's laughter was warm and genuine. "Oh, he's practical to a fault, my dear brother. Has been ever since." She stopped abruptly. "But that's not my story to tell. Now, you must tell me everything. How are you finding Thornfield? Has Mrs. Winters attempted to poison you yet?" She's fiercely protective of Quinlan. Despite her initial wariness, Georgiana found herself warming to Victoria's forthright manner. By the end of the afternoon, she had learned more about her husband through his sister than from the man himself. "He wasn't always so cold, you know," Victoria confided as they walked through the gardens. "There was a time when Quinlan laughed easily. Our parents' deaths changed him, and then Caroline." "Caroline?" Georgiana asked, unable to contain her curiosity. Victoria bit her lip. "His fiancée, many years ago. She jilted him rather spectacularly for an Italian count. It was quite the scandal, though not as dramatic as yours, I must say." She patted Georgiana's arm. "Sorry, that was tactless of me." "It's quite all right," Georgiana assured her. "The scandal seems to be the primary thing people know about me these days." "Well, that will change," Victoria said confidently. "You don't strike me as a woman who will remain in the background for long. Just—" She hesitated. "Be patient with Quinlan. He builds walls to protect himself, but there's a good man behind them." That evening, dinner was more animated than usual with Victoria present. Georgiana observed the siblings' interaction with interest, noting how Victoria drew out a side of the Baron she had not previously witnessed, one that occasionally hinted at dry humor and even warmth. "Your sister is delightful," Georgiana commented later, when they found themselves briefly alone in the library. It was the first time she had initiated a personal conversation with her husband. "Victoria has always been the social one in the family," he replied, not looking up from his ledger. "A quality I'm sure you share, given your previous popularity in London society." Georgiana stiffened at his tone. "Are you implying that I, like your sister, am frivolous?" The Baron finally looked up, surprise evident in his expression. "I made no such implication. Victoria is many things, but frivolous is not among them. She merely possesses social graces that I find challenging." "As do I, apparently," Georgiana said dryly. "We've been married for nearly a fortnight, and this is perhaps the longest conversation we've had." A faint frown creased his brow. "You found our arrangement unsatisfactory?" "I believe I have fulfilled all conditions of our agreement." "To the letter, yes," she agreed. "But marriage, even one of convenience, generally involves some degree of companionship, does it not?" "Companionship," he repeated, as if testing an unfamiliar concept. "What form would you prefer this companionship to take, madam?" Georgiana suppressed a sigh of frustration. "Perhaps we might start with you calling me by my name, rather than a Madam or Mrs. Zachariah, as if I were your housekeeper. And possibly sharing breakfast occasionally, or a walk in the gardens. Simple courtesies that most husbands and wives exchange." The Baron was silent for a long moment. "Very well. Georgiana. If it would make your situation here more comfortable, I shall endeavor to be more companionable." It was a small victory, but Georgiana counted it nonetheless. The following morning, she was surprised to find her husband at the breakfast table, reading a newspaper but clearly waiting for her. "Good morning," he said formally. "I trust you slept well." "Well enough, thank you," she replied, taking her seat as the footman poured her tea. "And yourself?" "Adequately." Silence descended once more, but at least they were sharing the silence now rather than avoiding each other entirely. Progress, Georgiana thought wryly, was measured in small steps. Over the following weeks, a cautious routine developed. They shared breakfast most mornings, dinner every evening. The Baron, Quinlan, as she now occasionally dared to think of him, gradually became more conversational, though their exchanges remained largely impersonal. He spoke of estate matters, local politics, books they had both read. She discussed household improvements, correspondence with neighbors, plans for the gardens. It was civil, cordial even, but far from intimate. The first real crack in the Baron's facade came unexpectedly, when Georgiana fell ill with influenza. What began as a slight chill after being caught in a sudden rain shower quickly developed into a raging fever that confined her to bed for days. On the third night, delirious with fever, she woke to find a figure sitting beside her bed. Through the haze of illness, she recognized her husband, his face drawn with what appeared to be concern. "You're here," she murmured, uncertain if she was dreaming. "Yes," he said simply, pressing a cool cloth to her forehead. "The doctor says the fever should break by morning." "You gave the household quite a fright, Georgiana." "Did I frighten you as well?" she asked, the fever making her bolder than she would normally dare. In the dim lamplight, something flickered across his face, vulnerability, perhaps. "I find that I have grown accustomed to your presence. It would be inconvenient to lose you now." Georgiana might have laughed had she the strength. "How romantic," she whispered instead. "Romance was not part of our arrangement," he reminded her, but his tone lacked its usual sharpness. "No," she agreed, her eyes growing heavy again. "But kindness might have been." She thought she felt his hand brush against hers as sleep reclaimed her, but in the morning, she couldn't be certain it wasn't just another fever dream. The illness proved a turning point, however subtle. Upon her recovery, Georgiana found her husband more attentive, more present. He began to join her for walks in the garden, to ask her opinion on estate matters, to share occasional stories from his childhood at Thornfield. "My father taught me to ride on that hillside," he told her one afternoon as they stood on the terrace overlooking the estate. "I fell off 7 times before I managed to stay mounted for more than a minute." "I cannot imagine you failing at anything 7 times, Georgiana said with a small smile. "I was a rather stubborn child," he admitted. "Victoria would say I remain a stubborn man." "Your sister is perceptive," Georgiana observed, then added more gently, "but persistence is not always a fault." He glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "And what about you, Georgiana? What faults do you claim?" She considered the question seriously. "Pride, perhaps. A tendency to speak my mind when discretion might serve better. And I cannot abide injustice, which sometimes leads me to champion causes others find inconvenient." "Those sound more like virtues disguised as faults," he remarked. "As does stubbornness, in the right circumstances," she countered. For the first time in their acquaintance, she witnessed a genuine smile transform his features, softening the hard lines and illuminating his grey eyes. It lasted only a moment, but its impact lingered long after. That evening, a letter arrived from London, from Lord Huntington, the man who had jilted her at the altar. Georgiana's hands trembled as she broke the seal. "Unpleasant news?" the Baron inquired, noticing her distress as they sat in the drawing-room after dinner. "Lord Huntington writes to inform me that he and my cousin Eleanor are to have their first child," she replied, struggling to keep her voice even. "He thought I should hear it from him rather than through society gossip." "How considerate of him." The Baron set aside his book. "Does it pain you still? Your feelings for him?" Georgiana laughed, a brittle sound. "I never loved Richard Huntington. Our engagement was my father's arrangement, not my heart's choice. What pains me is the memory of standing in the church, waiting, while the whispers grew around me. The humiliation of it, the public spectacle." She broke off, embarrassed by her emotional display. "Then Huntington is both a fool and a coward," her husband said with unexpected vehemence. "To humiliate you publicly rather than ending the engagement honorably speaks to his character, not yours." Surprised by his defense, Georgiana studied him with new eyes. "Thank you for saying so. It is merely the truth." He hesitated, then added more softly, "The man who would jilt you, Georgiana, does not deserve your tears, feigned or otherwise." The moment hung between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. Then the clock chimed 9, and the Baron rose from his chair. "I have correspondence to complete before retiring," he said, his formal manner returning. "Good night, Georgiana." "Good night, Quinlan," she replied, using his given name for the first time. He paused at the doorway, glanced back at her with an expression she couldn't interpret, then continued on his way. That night, Georgiana lay awake long into the small hours, contemplating the strange turn her life had taken. She had entered this marriage expecting nothing more than financial security and the restoration of her social standing. Instead, she found herself increasingly drawn to the complex, guarded man who was her husband in name only. The following day brought unexpected news. They were to host a dinner party for neighboring families, at the Baron's request. "It is time to introduce you properly as Baroness Zachariah," he explained over breakfast. "I have been remiss in my social obligations." The announcement sent the household into a flurry of activity. Georgiana threw herself into the preparations, determined to prove herself a capable hostess. The evening of the dinner arrived with unseasonable warmth, the June air heavy with the scent of roses from the gardens. Georgiana dressed with particular care, selecting a gown of deep emerald silk that complemented her auburn hair and fair complexion. As she secured the last pin in her hair, a knock sounded at her chamber door. Enter, she called, expecting her lady's maid with a forgotten item. Instead, the Baron himself appeared, resplendent in evening attire. He stopped abruptly upon seeing her, something akin to admiration flickering in his gaze. "Forgive the intrusion," he said after a moment. "I wish to give you this before our guests arrive." He extended a small velvet box. Inside lay a necklace of emeralds and diamonds, the stones catching the lamplight in brilliant flashes. "It was my mother's," he explained as Georgiana stared in surprise. "The color suits you." "It's beautiful," she whispered, genuinely moved by the gesture. "Thank you." "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the necklace. Georgiana nodded, turning to allow him to fasten it around her neck. His fingers brushed against her skin, sending an unexpected shiver down her spine. Their eyes met in the mirror, and for a breathless moment, something electric passed between them. The spell broke at the sound of carriage wheels on the gravel drive below. "Our first guests have arrived," the Baron said, stepping back. "Shall we greet them together?" The evening proved a remarkable success. Georgiana charmed the local gentry with her warmth and wit, while the Baron displayed a social grace she had not previously witnessed. They moved in perfect tandem, as if they had been married for years rather than months. "You and the Baron seem well matched," observed Mrs. Kensington, the vicar's wife, during a quiet moment. "I confess, when we heard of his sudden marriage, many of us feared, well, let us say we worried about his choice." "Due to my scandal?" Georgiana asked directly. Mrs. Kensington had the grace to blush. "People do talk, my dear. But seeing you together this evening has silenced most wagging tongues, I should think." The Baron seems content. It has been many years since anyone could say that of him. Later, as the last guests departed and they stood alone in the entrance hall, Georgiana found herself unexpectedly shy in her husband's presence. "You were magnificent tonight," he said, breaking the silence. "Every inch the Baroness." "As were you every inch the Baron," she replied with a small smile. "I had no idea you could be so charming when required." "I contain multitudes, it seems," he said dryly, but there was warmth in his eyes that had not been there before. "Would you care for a brandy in the library before retiring? The evening has been long, but I find I'm not yet ready for sleep." They sat before the fire, the conversation flowing more easily than ever before. Perhaps it was the success of the evening, or the brandy's warmth, but Georgiana found herself asking the question that had lingered since Victoria's visit. "Your sister mentioned someone named Caroline," she said carefully. "A former fiancé." The Baron's expression shuttered immediately. "Victoria talks too much." "She cares for you," Georgiana said gently. "As do I," she stopped, surprised by her own admission. He looked at her sharply. "Care for me? We barely know each other." "Don't we?" she challenged. "We have lived under the same roof for nearly 3 months. We have shared meals and conversations, managed a household together, entertained guests. I may not know all your secrets, Quinlan, but I know the man you are today." "And what man is that?" he asked, his voice low and intense. "A man of honor and integrity. A man who treats his tenants fairly and his servants with respect. A man who reads poetry when he thinks no one is watching, and who sat by his wife's sickbed though their marriage is one of convenience only." She drew a deep breath. "A man I have come to admire greatly." He stood abruptly, moving to the window to stare out into the darkness. "You see what you wish to see, Georgiana. The truth is less flattering." "Then tell me the truth," she insisted, rising to join him. "Tell me about Caroline. Tell me why you built these walls around yourself." For a long moment, she thought he would refuse. Then, without turning from the window, he began to speak. "Caroline Elliston was the daughter of my father's closest friend. Our families always assumed we would marry, and when we came of age, an engagement was announced. I was not in love with her, but I respected her and believed we would make a suitable match. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. 3 weeks before the wedding, I discovered her in a compromising position with Count Vaselli, an Italian nobleman who was visiting nearby. When confronted, she confessed that they had been lovers for months and that she was carrying his child. "Oh, Quinlan," Georgiana murmured, instinctively reaching for his hand. He allowed the contact, though his gaze remained fixed on the darkness beyond the glass. The scandal was contained. Her family sent her to Italy, where she married the Count and had her child. Society was told that she had broken the engagement due to a change of heart. My pride was wounded, but I recovered. That is not why. He hesitated. Not why you closed yourself off, Georgiana finished for him. No. Finally, he turned to face her. A year after she left, Caroline died in childbirth. Her last letter, delivered after her death, revealed that she had never loved the Count either. She had merely used him to escape a marriage she dreaded, to escape me. His voice turned bitter. She wrote that she could not bear the thought of spending her life with a man so cold, so unfeeling that he had never once made her feel truly desired or loved. Understanding dawned. And you believed her assessment of you. It was accurate, he said flatly. I had approached our engagement as a business transaction, much as I approached ours. Caroline's death showed me the consequences of such coldness. So you retreated further, Georgiana said softly. Convinced yourself that emotional distance was safer for all concerned. His silence was confirmation enough. Caroline was wrong about you, she said firmly, still holding his hand. Whatever man you were then, the man you are now is capable of great feeling, you simply guard it too carefully. And how would you know that? He challenged. Because, Georgiana said, gathering her courage, despite your best efforts to maintain your distance, I have fallen in love with you, Quinlan Zachariah. And I believe a truly unfeeling man could not have inspired such love. The confession hung in the air between them. Shock registered plainly on his face, followed by disbelief, then something more complex. You cannot love me, he said finally. Our arrangement began as a practical solution to mutual problems, she acknowledged. But people change. Feelings grow. I did not expect to love you, but here we are. He released her hand, pacing the length of the library. What do you want from me, Georgiana? What do you expect? Nothing you are not willing to give, she replied honestly. I have no illusions that you return my feelings. I simply thought, after tonight, that perhaps you might be open to the possibility of more between us than a mere business arrangement. He stopped his pacing, turning to study her with an intensity that made her heart race. And if I am not capable of offering more? Then we continue as we have been, she said with dignity, though the prospect pained her. I entered this marriage with open eyes, Quinlan. I will not demand what you cannot give. Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight parting of lips as if in wonder. With measured steps, he closed the distance between them. You are a remarkable woman, Georgiana Zachariah, he said quietly. Far more than I deserve. Before she could respond, he lowered his head and kissed her, hesitantly at first, then with growing assurance as she responded. It was their first kiss since the brief, formal exchange at their wedding ceremony, but there was nothing formal about this embrace. When they finally parted, both were breathing unevenly. I cannot promise you poetry and passionate declarations, he said, his forehead resting against hers. But I can promise to try. To open the doors I have kept locked for so long. That is all I ask, Georgiana whispered, her heart full. Time and honesty between us. That night, for the first time, they retired to the same chamber, no longer Baron and Baroness in name only, but husband and wife in truth. ******. 1 year later the London society papers would speak of nothing else for weeks. Baron and Baroness Zachariah had become the toast of the season, their romance transforming from a scandalous marriage of convenience into the most envied match in England. The Baron, once known as the coldest man in Derbyshire, now rarely left his wife's side at social functions, his devotion evident to all who observed them. Who would have believed it, the gossips marvelled. The cold Baron, utterly besotted with his bride. And she with him, others would add. After that dreadful business with Huntington, such a fortunate turn of events for Miss Oakley after all. In their private chambers at Thornfield Hall, far from London's prying eyes, Quinlan and Georgiana sat before the fire, his hand resting protectively over the gentle swell of her belly where their first child grew. "The gossips have it wrong, you know," Georgiana said, smiling up at her husband. "It wasn't fortune or luck that brought us here." "No," he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "What then?" "Courage," she replied simply. "Yours in opening your heart after so many years, and mine in believing it possible." "My brave, beautiful wife," Quinlan murmured. "I thank God every day for your courage, and for the convenience that brought you to me." Georgiana laughed, the sound warming the room like summer sunshine. A most inconvenient convenience, as it turned out. "The best kind," he agreed, drawing her into his arms. "The only kind worth having." Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing Thornfield's grounds in pristine white. But within the ancient walls, warmth and love had finally taken root, transforming what had begun as a cold bargain into something neither had dared hope for, a true and lasting love.